Hi everyone, welcome to FX PhD, Class 7. It's the After Effects for Broadcast Design course with me, Tim Clapham. This week what we're going to do is carry on from where we left off last week. So let's just open After Effects. Okay, so here's the project we were working on. So what we're going to do this week is hopefully finish where we left off. Just a quick round preview to remind you all of where we got to. Okay, so let's crack on with it. Okay, so as we're dealing with a kind of police program and the first part is homicide, I thought a good addition for details would be something like blood splatters. So what I've done is got some red food colouring and kind of dripped it onto some paper and grabbed it with the video camera. So I'm just going to import that and then we'll have a look at what we've got and how we're going to use it. So I've imported the movie, it's called Splatters. Have a quick look at that. Okay, so you can see it's pretty rough looking, DV quality, just shot it on a mini DV cam. What we're going to do is we're going to use that and create a map from itself and then combine it with our homicide text. I've dragged the Splatters movie and created a new comp, called it Splatters 01. Here it is. So I'm just going to try and use this to make a mat. As you can see around the edges we've got some problems where the edges of the paper are seen. So I'm just going to add a mask by double clicking that. I've added a shape layer, apologies there, I need to select the layer and then do it. Okay. Let's just scale the mask down slightly. That should do. That will get rid of all the stuff around the edge that we don't want to see. Okay. I'm just going to put the time marker where we can see a kind of splat like that so we can see more or less what we're doing. First thing I'm going to do is just desaturate the image using hue saturation, just so it's black and white, and then I'm going to add the levels effect. Okay, and what I want to do here is just make the paper white and make this black so we can kind of use it as a luma mat. It's going to be a pretty rough mat, but I think for our purposes it'll be fine. Okay. That doesn't look too bad. I'm just going to invert it as well. So you choose channel invert. And let's just scrub through and see if we can see any problems with the mat. What I'm looking for is kind of sort of where the white might show through, the white of the paper. But I think generally that looks okay. So if we come back to the project and drag in our Splatters movie again and place it underneath, and let's just set this to Luma Matte Splatters. Okay, you can see that that's now worked. We have got some pretty bad fringing around the edge of it, but for this example I really don't think that that matters too much. Obviously if you wanted to put a better matte on it, you could always choke this in another comp, or you could add some colour correction just to get rid of the white around the edge. I actually quite like the crudeness of it for this example. There's only one other thing I'm going to do to this layer. I'm just going to increase the saturation, just so the red is a kind of a deeper red, a bit more blood-like. Lovely stuff. Now we've got this with an alpha. I'm going to close it down and drag it into another comp, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sequence the splats, so instead of them being sequential they all kind of stay on screen at the same time, so I'm going to use a time remapping for that. What I'll do is I'll set that up rather than go through it stage by stage, and then I'll just show you how I've done it. So for the first layer I've just trimmed it back so that the first splat starts straight away. Now that carries on to here and then it just disappears, obviously an edit there. So if we go to time, enable time remapping, what we can do is just add a key here and then delete the last key, and then it will hold that point in time for the rest of the comp. And I'm going to do that for each layer so that all the splatters appear together. And then we can kind of rearrange them into a nice looking composition. I've used the same technique on the other layers, so now we have all the splats kind of occurring at the same time. Just need to stagger them so they happen one after another and reposition each layer so that we have a nice looking composition. At the moment they're all on top of each other, and obviously that's not what we want. As you can see, I've sort of staggered the layers, and if we scrub through you can see I've repositioned them so they don't overlap and they all kind of drop in sequence. So that's ready to be used. So we can stop this and close this comp. I'm just going to save again and then carry on. I'm going to add the splatters text in. I'm just going to jump forward so I can see the words homicide. Now we know that the homicide text is on 0 Z. What I want to do is put the splatters behind it, just sort of above the right hand side. So obviously the first thing to do is bring that in and position it. So I'm just going to bring it in here and then set the position. Obviously we need to set it as a 3D layer, and I'm going to turn on motion blur as well. Okay, I've done that and I've positioned it at 900, 15, 800. So it's sitting behind the homicide. I'm just going to rotate it on Y 25 degrees as well, so it's at the same kind of angle. Now you can see that this layer isn't long enough, so we're going to need to extend that. So if we jump back to our comp before and then jump back to Splatters 01, okay, you can see that the reason it's that length is because that's the length of the original movie that I've used. So we can't adjust it in the Splatters 01 comp because we can't really extend the movies, but we can quite easily do it in Splatters 02 because we have time remapping. We can extend these layers for as long as we like. So Command K to bring up the comp settings for that. I'm just going to set it to be 5 seconds, which is a bit longer than we need, but it saves coming back and adjusting it later. The thing is that although we've done that, you have to be a little bit wary because your layers will still all be trimmed the same. So if we pull the timeline out, you can see that it's all going to end there. So the easiest way to do that is just to go Command or Control A to select them all, page down to go to the end, and then Alt right square bracket, and that will trim all the layers to the end point. And now you can see we have that as a still for the 5 seconds. So now we can come back to the main comp and we can extend this for as long as we need to, and we can do that when we have a look at the transition. So here we go. Okay, so that's where it moves out of sight, so I've pretty much trimmed it correctly there anyway. Let's just give it another frame or two, just so that we get the blood splatters disappearing correctly. Okay, that seems cool. Here's a quick RAM preview just to show the splattery part. I think that they come on slightly too soon. It would be good if they didn't start dripping until the text is in place. Now that's easy enough to fix. We just need to trim the start point of that layer so that that's when it occurs. I think something like that. Let's have a quick go. Yeah, the timing is definitely better now. The splats occur as the homicide text lands in place. Cool stuff. So I'm going to add another instance of this splatters layer, and I'm going to put it right in the foreground here so that we can really see the sort of handheld camera, because you'll get everything multiplaning quite a lot. So let's just stop this. Right, I can fold up this splatters layer. I'm going to drag it in again. Again, set it as 3D and enable motion blur. I want this to start slightly later in time, so I'm just going to put in 10 for now. So we're on frame 10 and hit the left square bracket to start that layer there. Just need to position and rotate it. This is going to be much more in the foreground. I've adjusted the position of this. You can see it's now at minus 1365 on Z, which brings it much closer to the camera. So as we kind of scrub through, you get some nice motion. I think the blood's actually a little bit spread out, so I'm going to go back to my Splatters 02 comp, and I'm going to just reposition a couple of the blood splats, just so that it hasn't got such a big gap in between. I've just moved the top layer, this one, so it's in there, so it's more bunched together. So that should be good, and we can just reposition the splatters in the main comp. I don't want it to intrude on top of the homicide text quite so much. A little bit, but not quite as much as that. Okay, so could also rotate it slightly. I don't think doing it with the tools is the best method. I think I'm going to do it numerically around here. So I'm just going to adjust the Z so it's not quite infringing on it so much. And we can pull it down slightly. Now I could leave it like this, but obviously it's looking pretty poor quality, and I want to kind of simulate depth of field. We could activate depth of field in the camera, but I think it's going to be just as easy to add a blur to this. I don't really want to be setting focus points and stuff like that. I just want this front item to be out of focus. So I'm going to add a box blur. I'm going to leave it at one iteration so that it looks quite poor quality, but it kind of gives it a little bit more of a camera blur. Obviously I could use the real lens blur effect, but I just think that's overkill for something like this. So if we just set this to 10, there we go. Now we've got the blood splatters landing in the foreground. So let's just have a quick preview of what that looks like so far. And there we go. It's worked as expected. So now we've got a little bit more detail in there. Let's add in something else just to give it a bit more colour and fill out the empty black spaces. As usual, I'm going to do my incremental save and then carry on. I'm going to add some noise in between and then kind of grade it red so that we've got sort of some kind of like an organic texture going on in between the blood splatters. We need to make sure that obviously this is all still legible. I'm going to do it in a pre-comp so I can use it again several times. So first of all I'm just going to set up the new comp. I've called it noise, and I've set it to 1200 by 800 square pixels with the duration 10. I'm going to add a new solid to this. Doesn't really matter what colour it is. And then I'm going to go effect, noise, fractal noise. Okay, so it's at the default settings here. I'm going to choose a different type, dynamic progressive. It looks a little bit more organic, kind of bodily, fluidy type thing. Pretty gross, but it will suit the subject that we're working on. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up. I think I'm going to scale it up to about 1000. Okay. So at the moment it's just static, so what we want to do is we just want to animate the evolution so we get this some turbulence occurring in here. So I just set a key for evolution, jump to the end, and I'm going to say 2 full revolutions. And now if we scrub through, we've got this undulating noise that we can use in our main comp. Now what I want to do is make it so that we can see through this, so we can see the text and everything like that. The way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to use this comp and set a matte from its luminance. So because I'm going to do that, what I want to do is just create a darker area around here where the text and everything needs to show through, so we get more of the noise around the edge, almost like a vignette of noise. The simplest way to do that is to add the same solid again. I actually want this to be black, so I'm going to go Shift Command Y, and I'm going to affect all layers that use this solid. It's only these two, and I'm going to set it to black. So it did matter what colour I wanted actually, but it's easily fixed. Next thing I'm going to do is go to the ellipse tool, double click that to add a mask. All that's left to do is just reshape the mask and give it some feather. So if we press F for feather, let's say 450. Okay, and let's kind of reshape it slightly. I think something like this looks about right. I'm going to just lower the opacity of that as well. I'm not sure, that may be a bit too low, but we'll have a look at it in the main comp and see what it looks like. We can always come back and adjust it later. So now we've created this fractal noise composition, we can use this at the beginning for the homicide text and also for the evidence text, and we can add colour and everything in the main comp. So we close this down, come back to the main comp and drag our noise in. I want to place it between the two splatters, so I've kind of placed it in the hierarchy like that. Even though I'm going to make it 3D and the position will actually determine where it is, I just like to keep my layers in the sort of relative order that they are in space. Hopefully we've made it big enough so that we don't see the edges of it. Let's just press P to bring them up position, and now I'm going to just position this comp. So 288 for the Y value is fine, that's kind of the centre. It's a bit over to the right, so I'm going to just set this to say 450, a little bit more, 440, and then the Z value, I want it much closer. If we look at our splatters position, it's kind of minus 1400, that's where I was like manually moving it around. So we want it somewhere in between there, so I'd say something like minus 800. If we just zoom out, we can see that we've got the comp fully outside the pre-comp here noise. The borders of it are obviously past the edge, which is great because that's obviously what we want. We don't want to see any hard edges there. At the moment we can't see anything behind it now, so it's a matter of adding a few effects. If we come up to channel and we can choose set matte. Now you use this for setting the matte and the alpha of certain layers, and you can take them from different layers. So up here you can choose to take the alpha from one of the other layers if you like, or you can take it from the layer itself, and then it asks you what you want to use to create that matte. Now we don't actually have an alpha channel, which is why we're doing this, so I think what we're going to do is use the luminance values. Okay, there you go. So now what it's done, if we just solo that layer, that's the alpha that it's created, and that's the result. So that's quite a cool way of doing that without having to use any track mats or anything like that. Finally, for this layer I want to add in some colour. I'm going to use CC toner for this. Quick and easy. We could also use Colorama, which has kind of got a lot more control because you have a gradient on this. So here you can adjust the gradient, so you can choose a much wider range of colour. For this example though, CC tone is going to be fine. I'm going to just hide the actual noise layer that we're referring to, and that's just so that I can use these colour pickers to pick some colours from the comp that we've got already. So I'm going to pick a light red, darker red, and then finally a really dark red. So if we switch that layer back on now, there you go, you can see we've got this red noise that's affecting everything. The red seems to be dominating over this side, so I'm going to just bring up my rotation for that, and I'm going to rotate it on Z 180. It's basically flipping it round, so we get a bit more red this side. It's kind of balancing the comp a little bit more, makes it framed slightly better. So there we go, as a round preview of where we've got to so far. The evolution of the noise is quite subtle, but that's probably preferable. You could always increase the number of rotations on that if you want it to show up slightly more. Cool stuff. So let's move on and add some more elements into the next shot. If we just scrub through the timeline to the transition, okay. Just want to get to the point in time where evidence is clear. We know at this point we can trim our noise layer. So now we're at the evidence section. What I want to do is kind of repeat the same kind of principle, but this time use a subject that relates to evidence. So some of the things I thought about were things like DNA. We've got the fingerprint there. Another thing I thought was kind of cells, because with forensics obviously it goes down to DNA and cellular level. So I thought it'd be quite a good idea to add some cells in here, and also it gives me an excuse to add in a particle system, because it wouldn't be the same if I didn't put some particles in there somewhere. So what we're going to do first of all is just make the cell. So we've got the internet for reference, which is brilliant. So I went to the Science Photo Library and found some images of cells. This one kind of appealed to me most. So I'm going to try and make something slightly similar to that. Okay, so let's jump back to After Effects. So to make the cell, the first thing I'm going to do is set up a new comp. I've created a new comp. It's 10 seconds long, 100 by 100, and I've created a black solid which is at the same size. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click the ellipse tool to add a mask. This is the kind of main outline. I'm just going to scale that down slightly. And the effect I'm going to use again will be fractal noise. If you remember from this picture of the cell, it definitely looks like a noisy kind of texture inside there, so fractal noise should suit that perfectly okay. I've added fractal noise. I'm just going to change a few parameters. As you can see, it's pretty flat looking. I think the scale needs adjusting first of all. Okay, we're at 100 scale. I'm going to just set that to kind of 5%. And there we go, that looks a little bit more like it already. I think we need some more contrast, so I'm going to up that to 200. Okay, that's looking more like the cell image we looked at momentarily. I want to give it a little bit of life, so I'm going to keyframe the evolution. I want it to sort of evolve pretty much, quite fast, so it's kind of very blatant that it's actually doing it. So I'm actually going to set this to, I'm not sure, 8 evolutions over 10 seconds. Yeah, I mean that looks about right. We can always come back and adjust it later. At the moment it's obviously very, very regular shape, so I'm going to add another effect which is roughen edges, which is under the stylize category. Okay, if we just click on here we can hide our mask so we can see the effect that roughen edges is having. It uses like a noise, the same as fractal noise, but then it eats away at the alpha of the image. It's pretty handy for roughing up the edges of layers and stuff like that. The first thing to adjust on here would be the scale. As you can see, the roughen edges is very fine. So let's just set that to 500. There you go, you see it's a lot larger scale. Makes it look more irregular rather than just eating into. I'm going to reduce the border down. This is the how many pixels it kind of eats into the shape, so I'm going to make that 4 so it doesn't kind of erode it quite as much, and I really want to soften the edges up, so I'm going to set the sharpness to 0.1. Gives it a nicer, smoother, more anti-alias feel. Now again, roughen edges is kind of similar to fractal noise. It has an evolution option because at the moment the edge just stays the same all the way through, but if we animate the evolution then the edge will kind of wobble as well, give it more of a cellular feel. So I'm going to set that key there at the beginning. I don't think I want it to evolve quite as much as the noise in the centre, so I'm going to go for kind of half that value, which is 4. So now if we scrub through, you can see that the edge is kind of animating and wobbling around as well. From the reference image that I had, you can see that the cell has a kind of skin around it. I'm not sure the scientific name for that. I'm sure someone can correct me in the forums. But to make that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the layer and just scale the mask up on the one underneath. So I've duped that. On the layer underneath I've scaled the mask up. At the moment we can't see any difference because the noise etc is the same on both of the layers. So let's go in and adjust the noise on the back layer. Let's first of all change the noise type. Okay, you can immediately see there's a slight difference there. I don't think it needs to be so contrasty, and it probably wants to be a little bit brighter. And let's scale it up more so we can see more of the noise. Okay, I think that looks good. Nearly finished with this comp. I'm just going to come back to the top layer and I'm going to add a stroke so that we kind of get a border between the two parts of the cell. I'm going to need to have that in between the fractal noise and the roughing edges, because I want the stroke to take the roughing edges effect as well, otherwise we'll have a very precise stroke where our mask is. So we choose generate stroke. I'm just going to drag this up above roughing edges, hide my mask, set the colour to black. Okay, that's already looking good. And here's our cell so far. It's looking reasonably cellular. It hasn't got that kind of I'm in water look about it that the photograph had. So let's have a go at trying to add that effect to it. Now there is an effect in After Effects which is designed to kind of simulate items in water, to generate the caustics that you get, you know, like on the bottom of a swimming pool, things like that. But first of all, let's just take our cell, comp, dupe it to create a new one. And then I'm going to go Effect, Simulation, Caustics. It looks like it's just added a sort of blue colour to it at the moment. So let's have a look at the parameters we have here. Okay, at the moment it's using the cell layer as the bottom, and then we can specify what we want to use as the water surface. I'm going to specify cell as well. Immediately see it change. It's kind of looking very cellular now. And I'm just going to adjust a few of the other parameters. I'm not so sure about the blue at the moment. It will be going in the evidence part of the comp, which is blue, so I'm going to leave that for now. The thing I'm going to adjust is just the strength of the caustic. 0.8. As you can see, as you adjust that, the caustic effects get stronger and you get these kind of bright white areas. I'm going to go for 0.8. Now by adding this caustic effect, it's messed up our alpha. That's not a problem. We can easily fix that. One way of doing that is just to dupe the cell layer, remove the effect. So there we have our original layer, and we can just set this to use the alpha of that. So now we have a nice clean alpha. And I'll just round preview that so you can see what the cell looks like. And there you go, we've got a kind of undulating noise with the caustic effect and nice roughing edges, so it all looks rather organic. So what we can do now is we can jump back to our main comp and start setting up a particle system. Okay, so let's close these down and jump back to the main comp and start adding in the effect. I think I want the particles to start once that's settled into place. So it's going to be around 1 second 17 frames. I'm going to go back to the project window and drag in the large solid 1200 by 800, and I'm just going to place that above the splatters but underneath the thumbprint. I'll solo that layer just for now so we can see what's going on. So when we had the kind of early lessons about particle systems, one of them we looked at was foam. Now this is designed specifically really for kind of creating bubbles and things like that. So it's an ideal particle system for this cellular thing, because it will kind of add a little bit of wobble and everything to the particles for us. So that's the effect that I'm going to use. So we go Effect, Simulation, whoops, Foam. Okay. I'm going to trim the layer so it starts to this point, and I'm just going to press B so it begins from there. Now I can round preview it and I can see the bubbles just from that point. I don't need to watch anything else at the moment. I'm going to rename this Foam Cells 01. Hit E for effect, and we can have a look at the settings in Foam. First of all, let's say View Rendered. This will show us the actual particle that we want to see. Just going to drag this up slightly so I can see a little bit more of my timeline. Come back to the project window and drag Cell 02 into the comp and just hide that. The only reason I've done that is so I can use that as my custom particle. So if I come here, come to Rendering, Bubble Texture, User Defined, and then we choose our texture layer Cell 02. Okay, so now you can see we've got our cells coming in as the particle system, which is a good start. I'm not going to change anything in rendering. First thing I'm going to do is adjust the producer. I'm going to adjust the Y size, so it's I'm actually going to adjust them both. I'm going to make it 0.3 rather than 0.03, so it's wider, and 0.1 on Y. I don't want it over the whole of the Y axis, but I do want the producer to be not from a single point kind of thing. The next thing to look at is the production rate. We don't want it to produce particles forever. We want it to kind of produce a few and then stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump forward 10 frames, and I'm going to set this to 0. And then I'm going to just go back one and set it to 1. So for the first 9 frames it's got a production rate of 1, and then it stops, so it doesn't produce any more after that point in time. There we go. Okay, so they're all moving around quite a lot, so we'll have a look at that. Before we do that, let's look at the parameters for the actual bubbles themselves. I think I'm going to make them bigger, so let's say 1. Okay. And the lifespan, say 100. Not sure if we need to adjust that, but we don't want them living forever. Next thing is to look at the physics. I don't think I want any wind at all, because I don't want them to move around too much. So if we set that to 0, let's just scrub through and see what it's like. Okay, so they're not moving around quite as much as before. Let's lower the turbulence as well, and maybe increase the wobble. It's not looking too bad. And the other thing I'm going to adjust is the stickiness. I'm going to kind of double that, I think. And that should hopefully slow them down a little bit more as well when they kind of come near to each other. Okay. Let's just zoom out. That doesn't look too bad. So it's just a case of positioning that layer now. First of all, let's switch it to 3D. Switch on motion blur. If we unsolo that now, it's going to be totally disappeared. It's going to be down the bottom here. Somewhere. Oh, there we go, it's the red one there. So I'm just going to bring it up and put it behind evidence, similar to where I put the blood splats behind homicide. So let's just open up the position for that, and I'll adjust those parameters. First thing to do is to raise it up, so let's set this to minus 1200. Okay, now I want it over this side, so I need to adjust the X value. At the moment it's on 0 for Z, so it's kind of level with evidence. I want to put it behind, so it's probably prudent to adjust that parameter before we adjust the X value, because it's going to move back in space. We'll get a more accurate representation of where it's going to be. So let's set that to 800. I think that was the same as the blood splatter, so it's kind of the same distance behind. Now we can scrub our X value and move it over to where we want it, which is probably somewhere around there. Okay, we may want to move it up a little bit more just so it's not totally behind evidence. Something like that. Zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. It looks a little bit too sharp, and I think I'm going to adjust the colour of it so that it matches the blue on evidence slightly more. So I'm just going to put a slight little box blur, probably about half a pixel for the radius, and add toner so I can just set the blues so it matches a little bit more to evidence. I've added the box blur, I've set it to 0.5 and iterations 3, so it's kind of very subtle, but it just softens those up a little bit more. So we can fold that up, and we can fold up the foam parameters, and then I'm just going to add CC toner. And there you go, you can see the colours I've picked for that are dark blue, a mid sort of blue, and left white is white. So that's all matching in now. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did last time, and I'm going to take this layer and duplicate it and put it in the front and blur it so that we've got a similar composition as shot one. So I'm going to duplicate the layer, I'm going to drag it in front of all of these, open up position. First of all, let's adjust the Z value, so I'm going to put that to say minus 1600. So it's much closer now. I don't want this layer to start at the same time either, so I'm going to kind of start this a little bit later than the earlier foam layer, around 2 seconds. Jump forward a little bit so we can see the particles that have been emitted. At the moment we can't see anything, we can just see the bottom of the layer. So we just need to lower it down and move it across. I'm going to set this to kind of minus 1000. Okay. Still can't see anything, it's because it's such a vast layer. If we zoom back you can see that it's all there, so the particles are going to be over here somewhere. So let's just scrub our X value and bring it over. Here we go. I reckon that looks about right, something like that. We already have the box blur effect on here, so let's just open that up and set it to 10 as we did before, and let's lower the iterations down to 1. Okay, I might set that to 2. Yeah, that's better. So it's pretty blurry, but it'll have a similar motion and everything to the particles behind. There's one other thing we can do actually to make this slightly more unique. We can adjust the seed value in the particle system. Otherwise what will happen is all the particles that are produced will have exactly the same movement and pattern. If we adjust the seed value, then it will give it a certain amount of randomness. So I'm just going to scrub this. Okay, something like that. Let's just drag it over slightly more. Not too bad. I'm going to have a quick play with the rotation just to see what it looks like if it's in a different position. See, I kind of like it like this, where it's not so over the text. I can bring it back a little bit. I think the other thing I want to do is just actually scale this one down slightly. Let's say 80. Yeah, that's better. Okay, cool. That's our kind of foamy cellular edition. So we're almost done with this shot. The last thing to do would be to add the noise as we did before. So we've got a nice bit of continuity going between each shot, but they're all unique in their own way. So let's select the noise, duplicate this. I'm just going to solo the timeline by pressing the tilde key. Let's just drag this up to around here. So at the moment the noise layer I've duplicated is right down at the bottom next to the homicide text, so we need to raise that up. So again, I'm just going to adjust the position of this. The only thing we need to adjust is the Y parameter. We can leave the rest of it the same hopefully. So let's just set minus 1000 to see what that's like. Okay, the layer's been trimmed so we can't see it at all. Go to our foam cells and press I, select our noise layer, square left bracket just to trim that to there. Let's jump forward in time again so we can see it with all the other elements. Cool. Obviously the colour's wrong, but we can come into CC toner here and just pick some blues. And here I'm going to just kind of guess a blue, almost black. Get rid of that red, slight red tinge. Yeah. Good stuff. I've just made a round preview so you can see where we are so far. It's all coming together quite nicely. The only thing I think I'm going to change is, if you notice near the end here, let's just stop this. the first foam layer is kind of obscuring the word, the E of evidence slightly, making it a little bit illegible. So it's probably worth just sorting that out. I'm just going to rotate it. I think something like that would be okay, just so it doesn't infringe on the word so much. So that's evidence done. The last thing to do is to create the title at the end. I'm just going to save and then we can have a go at doing that. If we move to further down the timeline, okay, you can see we've got our crime text there, and it also has the text scene, which is hidden at the moment. So what I want to do is add in a 3D solid, so crime sits on it, and then have a light so that it casts the shadow, and you get the word scene on the solid. So obviously the first thing to do is create the solid and get it in the right position. There you go, I've added in the solid. So what I've done is I've created a solid. It's pretty huge, 5,000 by 2,500, and then I've positioned it. I've used the crime layer as a reference. As you can see, it's slightly lower on Y because crime has its anchor point in the middle. On the floor layer, what I've done is to position the anchor point right at the very edge, and then I've rotated it -90 on X so it's flat, and then just adjusted the orientation so it sits along the bottom of the word crime. So now what we can do is add a light into here, and we can then use that to cast the shadow. So what we need to do for that is add in a spotlight, and obviously set it to cast shadows and point in the right direction. So I've chosen layer new light, called it light crime scene. It's a spotlight with an intensity of 200, cone angle of 190, which is actually the widest it can go, and it's set to cast shadows. Now we've got the light in the scene, I've positioned it. I've set it quite a way back in Z, and I've positioned the point of interest to be here, which is kind of at the bottom of the crime word. So basically the light's in the background pointing directly at crime. Everything's disappeared, so we need to just solve that first of all. If we select crime and it says AA, it brings up our material options. If we adjust light transmission, then we can allow the light to kind of bleed through the letters. So I'm going to set that right up to 100. We don't want this layer to cast a shadow, so I'm going to leave cast shadows off for the crime layer. So at the moment scene is switched off. If we switch that on, okay, you can see it's immediately started working. I must have already set it to cast shadows. Yeah, so in here, if we just set that back to off, that's what it would have been like. You can just see the kind of black edge of it where it's behind crime slightly. So what we need to do is we want it to cast shadows only. We can switch cast shadows to on, but you can still see the word scene, although it's not particularly clearly visible here. It's casting a shadow onto crime. If we switch it to cast shadow only, then the actual word disappears. So that almost looks right. Let's come back to our crime layer, press AA again, and if we say accept shadows and switch that off, then the scene text won't cast a shadow onto crime. Cool. So there's only a couple more things to do. We need to get rid of the evidence shot that's in the background so that this is nice and clean. So as we pull back, we can get rid of that. And also it would be cool to animate the actual light moving so that we get the shadow sort of crawling across the solid there. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm just going to animate the light. Okay, I've done that. I mean, that's purely up to you how you do this, but what I've done is I've kind of, let's just jump forward slightly. Okay, so I've set a key for it so that the word scene is kind of short in here, and if we jump to the end, I've pulled the light down and moved it across so the shadow sort of elongates. So if we scrub through, you can see we get some motion on the shadow as well. Okay, we're nearly finished with this now, so Obviously we need to get rid of the blue behind from the evidence part of the comp. I'm just going to actually switch it off. You could always kind of create a solid and mask it in between the letter as it zooms back, or you could fade it out. But what I think would be quite good for this comp is to add in an adjustment layer and just go through, and where the transitions and things are, add some blurs and some glows. I think it would just be slightly more interesting. So what I've done to achieve this is I've added in solid here for this transition. This is the point where we transition back, and I've added onto it the levels effect and box blur, and then stepped through frame by frame and adjusted these values. So if we press U to see the keys that I've set, and we step through, you can see at that point everything's normal. The next frame, I've really crunched the histogram down here to bring the levels right up, and then I've added a 10 pixel blur. Jump forward again, and here I've brought the histogram back out and reduced the blur. I think at this point you could safely switch off all the blue layers behind, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to press tilde to toggle full screen for my timeline, and go through and select the layers and just trim them off at that point. You can also see that I haven't been as thorough as I should be, and for instance the splatters layer is still visible at this point in time. Well, there's no need for that to be there, so we can trim that one too. So I've just selected these these layers, and just trim that off at that point. I can just tilde to come back to my normal view. Okay, and I'm just going to trim off the splatters layer. I've got to the point where the evidence text is clear and just trimmed it there. So let's go back and see the other adjustments I made with my adjustment layer. So if you're following along with this, it's entirely up to you how you do this, and I've just kind of stepped through frame by frame, like I say, and just adjusted the levels and the box blur. So here I've spread the levels right out again, so this is kind of grey. Jump forward, and here again I've crunched it up and add a massive blur. You can see it's even blurring the shadow. And if we step through, you can see what I've done. Because it's on a frame by frame basis, it's going to be quite fast and choppy, and that will help hide the transition. So I'm just going to press B to set my current time there and give a quick round preview so you can see what that's like. There you go. Maybe the flash at the end is a little bit too much, but I kind of like the blue and the red and the kind of flashy glowiness. It sort of reminds me of police lights and that sort of thing. So that's cool. So really this project's kind of finished. The only thing to do is to add the same kind of effect to the transition between homicide and evidence. So I'm just going to do that for you and show you what I've done, and then it's job done. And obviously when you do it, you can adjust the transitions how it suits you. There we go. Basically I've duplicated the same adjustment layer and just dragged it back in time. I haven't used a blur this time, I've just used levels, but if we step through, you can see I've been quite extreme with it, and it affects the evidence as well. These one frames like this are quite good because it will just flash up and you won't really see what's going on, but it will kind of add a bit more excitement to the transition. So there we go. I think that's that project complete. I hope you've enjoyed it. Overall it's been around an hour and a half for both lessons. I'm sure when you are doing this you'll have a lot more time, so you'll be able to add quite a lot more finesse to yours. One thing that we could change right at the end here is we could add a solid in so that we've got kind of a dark blue behind crime. I'm actually going to do that. I think it will improve the project slightly, and why not? So at this point in time, just as the transition from evidence to crime scene occurs, I'm going to add a new solid, Apple Y. I'm going to pick a kind of dark blue, even though that wasn't. Something like this. Trim it to that point and drag it down below the floor layer. Now obviously this is a 2D layer, and it's also being affected by the adjustment layer. So I'm going to just adjust the opacity, add some keys so it's not visible at this point in time, but by the time we've reached the actual crime title, it will be clear. So let's jump forward, say 10 frames, and just set that to 100, and then F9 to ease into that key. Quick round preview to make sure that worked okay, and then we'll have a look at the whole project. Yeah, that seems to work fine. Groovy stuff. So let's round preview the whole project, have a look what we've done. So there's the round preview. All done. If anyone's following along on this and creating the project themselves, by all means keep adding detail, adding more finesse in this class. What we've basically done is we've looked at grabbing in some, or taking a movie of the splatters and creating a map from that, generating these cell particles using fractal noise, and then creating a particle system with foam, and then we've added in the crime scene using lights, casting shadows only from layers, and finally we've added in a few adjustment layers just to enhance the transitions. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you've got any questions, please post them on the forum. I'll be happy to answer anything. This is Tim Clapham, signing out for another week. Have a good one, folks.